Welcome back and thank you very much for joining me. My name is Swardik Mayanja and this is the Mayanja Accredited News Network, and we are having another episode of my Everyday Hero interview series where I interview someone in your life or someone in my life that makes us smile and does not get the credit they deserve. And I don't know too many things in this world that make us smile more than sex. Today I get the honor of interviewing Megara, the department director of sex education for the youth, correct?
Yep.
What's the title? You say it.
I'm the director of Partners in Sex Education, which delivers comprehensive sex education in the greater Boston area.
Wonderful. That's what she does, and that's why I am lucky and I get to interview her.
Better to have a short life that is full of what you like doing than a long life spent in a miserable way.
So, Megara, why don't you just tell me and the people, who are you and why sex education?
Sure. Well, I run Partners in Sex Education. We send educators out to area schools to talk to middle schoolers and high schoolers about sexuality, about relationships, about keeping themselves safe, about sex, gender, answering questions, all kinds of things. Why sex ed? Why did you decide that? Was that something that you just fell into? Has it been something you've been trying, going to school for? Kind of fell into. I feel that sexuality is something that is important to talk about with young people, but that they don't get a lot of opportunities to talk about with somebody that is going to give honest, not shame-based, unbiased answers. So I have been doing that for a while. I find it entertaining. It's something that I care about, and I love to study about, and I love to talk about, and I love to do classes in, and so I guess I did kind of just fall into that.
I think that's actually pretty great, and those are a lot of things. It's hard to talk about sex, I feel like, in our culture, and just be unbiased, not throw any, how you feel onto other people and let them decide for themselves. I just feel like everything today in American culture, well, a lot of things, the majority of things, is sexualized, right? And then trying to separate that, sexualized TV, music, all of that stuff, and then in the real world where sex actually happens and it's not always as fantastical as what we see and what we're told, are you guys educating children about this is not what you're supposed to do, this is what you're supposed to do, or is it just everything?
Well, I think your assessment is really on point, which is that our culture is saturated by sex and by sexuality, and it's in advertisement, and it's in television, and it's in movies, and it's in music, and it's everywhere. So we are saturated by sex. But at the same time, we're getting the messages of don't have sex and this sort of shame about sex. So yes. We get a very, very conflicted messages in our culture where it's just sex, 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 everyone's having sex, don't have sex. And sex education does the same thing, which is the very conflicted messages that we're giving young people. So for a long time, our country has very much supported abstinence-only sex education in which we're telling young people that the only way to keep themselves safe is to not have sex until marriage, which is not always the most effective way to keep young people safe. So lots of young people are having sex, and they need tools to keep themselves safer, given that the vast majority of people in our country don't actually wait until marriage. Some do, and sex education should support all different value systems. Sex education should allow young people who come from a variety of different cultures and belief systems, and they should be able to accept all of those people in the class. Yes. And give them information without bias. So the kid that is currently sexually active, the kid that will wait until marriage, gay kids, straight kids, kids from all different kinds of cultures and religions should all be able to get information and not be judged and not be shamed for the choices that they make.
Oh, definitely. And so when you say these kids should have that knowledge and have that education, where do you stand on when the sex ed should start, and then where do you stand on parents saying, no, I do not want my kids to get sex education?
So sex education starts right from the beginning in the home. The messages that you give to little kids about their bodies and the way you treat them and the way you talk about consent and boundaries with preschoolers. This is sex education. This is all important. Self-esteem, all of this starts in the home with the parents right from the beginning. In terms of school-based sex education, that really has to happen before puberty. So big, important thing. I mean, sex education can start kindergarten in terms of safety and boundaries and hygiene, all of this. Sex ed is an umbrella term that incorporates all of these topics. It's not just how people have sex in a very limited way. It's everything that has to do with your body and health and all of that stuff. So that can start early. Sex education about puberty, about what to expect, your body is changing, you might get erections, you might get your period, everything's different, you might feel different. That needs to start early. Kids are going through puberty in 4th and 5th grade, and it needs to start by that time.
Yes.
Definitely.
Yeah.
So through middle school, through high school, in college, in adulthood, we continue to have a need for information about sexuality into adulthood.
I love that you said that, because when I was in nursing school, my psychosocial class, we talked about sex ed a lot. And sex is everywhere, and it's everything we do. It's not just when we're in the bedroom. That's not just sex. Sex is everything. And when you say boundaries and hygiene and all that stuff, I like that. I really do like that. So let's start from the beginning. Beginning, when people are born and they are given a gender. Let's talk about gender. Just recently, I feel like there's been a lot of, well, just me personally, I've seen a lot of things popping up about how there's a ton of different genders now and labels for different genders. And it's not just trans or male or female. There's like, 5, 10, 15. Can you just explain that? I was taught that gender is like, but the day you're born, you're given that gender. Is that not right?
Well, this could be an entire episode of itself. Yes. But so gender, the way you put it is important, because that you talk about that a person is given a gender when they're born. Okay, so we have a couple of different aspects in sex and gender. One is things like chromosomes, X and Y chromosomes, what somebody is born with, right?
Yes.
Another is, which may or may not be the same, is sex assigned at birth, right? So what it says on your birth certificate, how do they decide whether they're going to write male or female on a birth certificate?
The genitalia.
Yeah, they just look between its legs and they're like, it looks like a boy, which is not a very scientific method, as it turns out. And so they assign one of those at birth.
Yes.
As it turns out, not everybody fits very cleanly into those male or female designations, and there are lots of folks that are sort of on a range in between. But your birth certificate does not have any room for that. Okay. Right? So if somebody is in between, it's called intersex. There's not an intersex designation on a birth certificate. Okay, so this is, nope, you are male or female, and they decide one or the other. So biology is one thing, sex assigned to birth is another thing. All of those happen in the body, the genitalia, and what they write in your birth certificate. Then you have gender. Identity. Which is what your brain understands itself to be. Oh, okay. Which is another complicated thing. Your brain knows you to be a man or a woman. Well, I could tell you your whole life that you are something, but if your brain knows something else, it knows. Yes. So that is gender, right? Yes. Man, woman, or a lot of other variations. Of course. Both, neither. There's a lot of kind of variations. Yeah. And I also learned in school that gender identity, so like your brain decides, or your brain knows that you are a female or a male, no matter what your genitalia is. That happens at the age of like 2 or 3. So when I learned that it was that young, and then when people start talking about transgender, people start talking about people who want to switch, if they know at that age, are you against people starting a transition from one gender to another at a young age, at like 6, 7, 10, 12?
Are you against that? Are you for it? What do you have to say about the transitioning?
I will say that's somewhat outside the realm of what I am an expert at.
Okay.
I think that identity is something that should be acknowledged, and that identity does form at typically 3 years old, and that needs to be acknowledged and respected. In terms of medical interventions, that becomes a lot more ethically complicated.
Yes. So you don't have like a yes or no, or you should do it or you shouldn't do it. You just know that
You gotta go with the individual.
it's
gotta
very
go with the
individual. And do you think that the parent should have full say?
I think that this is a good and interesting question. I think that the child should have the full say. The child should have consent. So we're going to go back to one of the things in terms of the biology. For instance, with intersex children, often what happens is because they're designated as male or female, there's medical interventions to make that baby look more appropriately male or female. This, to me, is a consent issue, whereas a baby does not have the option to consent to what is actually pretty major surgery.
No, I mean, that's intense.
And that is intense, and I really feel like that should not be done without a child's consent. And so they need to wait until the child is old enough to make some choices for themselves about what they want to do.
Especially when it comes to surgery. I mean, that's forever. That's
forever.
life. It is kind of crazy when we think about that. So when we're still there, a little off the gender identity, are you pro or against circumcision? Or is that something else?
That's another complicated
That's
question.
another complicated question.
So I'm going to give you a different answer for the educator me and for me. Okay? The educator me is going to say that different people are different families make different choices, and it's really important for me in a classroom setting to acknowledge that all of those choices have validity and not to shame or judge anyone for different choices like that. The me says that again, doing surgery on a baby that does not consent is it's a questionable consent issue, and I feel that if the baby doesn't consent to that, then I don't really think that is fair, and I think that it is surgery that doesn't really have a medical purpose. It really is much more cultural reasons, cultural and religious reasons that people circumcise their children. And I'm certainly not in a classroom setting going to argue with people's culture and religion.
Yes.
But for me, it is a consent issue.
Yes, I agree with you entirely, because we also spend a lot of time on this topic too. So you can't say like switching genders is a consent issue and then say circumcision. No, that's not. It's surgery, right? That doesn't change. You're changing someone's genitalia. You're doing some kind of major surgery that child, that person doesn't have a choice, right? And then just a big, huge no. I mean, this have been banned in the majority of countries, but female
genital mutilation.
Exactly.
Right. No, I think that's a really nice analogy, because we, as a culture, vilify female genital mutilation, and yet circumcision we think is okay. So I think that's a little bit hypocritical.
Yeah, it definitely is. Just to close up on this specific topic, I have yet to ever see a child or family that has made the decision to allow their kid who wants to switch from one gender to another regret it. Like, is that something that happens?
Have
you seen it in your?
Seen it either. I know a lot of families with transgender children, and I have not seen that. I've
something
never
seen
that they
it.
Wish they could go back. So.
I've never heard of it. So for those people, I just this is personal opinion. I just think if someone believes it, they believe it. If they think that that's who they are, that's who they are, right? We can't argue and say you are not this person, you are that person. So back to your job, your career, what you do. What is the goal? What's the end goal?
Good question. Because a lot of the goals of different sex ed curriculum are, for instance, to delay when people start having sex, or to increase condom use, or to increase STD testing or to reduce teen pregnancies.
Yeah.
A lot of them, I really feel, with sex education, I feel that a lot of those more concrete goals are actually kind of short-sighted. So, for instance, if I tell you, if you have sex, your dick will turn blue and fall off.
No more sex.
And then you're like, oh my gosh, I don't want my dick to turn blue and fall off. And you're just like, I'm just not going to have sex, right? Is that a successful sex education program? Not at all. Because a young person is eventually going to become an adult. And we want that adult to have a healthy, positive view of sexuality and of their bodies. I think that the goal of sex ed really needs to be to give young people the tools to be happy, healthy adults. And so we need to look at it as a much more long-range view, not the just, less sex or more condoms or whatever. I mean, whatever is the short range, we need to look at the happy, healthy adulthood. And so we have to have people to have a good attitude about what a relationship can be and a good attitude about their bodies and feel basically okay about the decisions that they can make.
That's a great goal. I think that is the best goal because people need to have the information. Whatever they do with that information, that's on them. But the information needs to be out there, give it to them, and they need to know what the truth is, not what these scare tactics. And I really feel like a lot of sex ed. Well, I'm lucky that I had, I would say, good-ish sex ed. But what I hear and what I've seen around, through my education is in other states, other countries, other places, it's all just scare. Your dick's going to turn blue or purple.
And, if you have great sex ed, that's, or good-ish, then that's great. And that's actually pretty rare. People assume that kids in high school are getting sex ed, but the vast majority of them, including in Massachusetts, are not. Another thing that you pointed to that I think is important is that they need to get true information. This is something I feel very strongly about sex education.
Please
is
tell
that
us.
It needs to follow 3 criteria.
Okay.
One is the sex ed curriculum needs to be true. That might seem kind of obvious, but a surprising amount of sex ed actually has false information that they give to young people in the classroom, which is bad information, but also it reduces your legitimacy. If I'm going into a classroom and telling young people something that is not true, then that undermines my credibility. True is incredibly important, and a surprising amount of sex ed information is not true. The second criteria is it needs to be useful. It needs to be actually relevant to your life. It needs to be functional information. I can talk all day about the complicated protein strands on the outside of syphilis, but who cares?
No one.
Maybe if you're a nurse, you care.
Oh, yeah.
But if you're a high school student, you probably don't care. It's not functional knowledge to making decisions about your day-to-day life.
Definitely.
So it needs to be true, it needs to be useful, and the third is that it needs to be not harmful. That also might sound obvious, but there's a surprising amount of information and misinformation that I think does more harm than good. A lot of sex ed programs, for instance, talk about how often condoms break. So when I go to a classroom to talk to kids about condoms, I'll say, well, how effective do you think they are? I get answers like 50%. They are told over and over and over again that condoms are not effective and that they break all the time. This is horrible misinformation. It is not true, and it is also harmful because it gives people no incentive to use them.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm thinking. Yeah. If it's not useful, why use it? That's
right.
like the first thing that comes to mind.
There's lots of information that I get out there that fails on a lot of these. And I'm going to use a very, very commonly stated sex ed fact, which is when we talk about HIV transmission, what people talk about in high schools is they just talk about HIV can be carried in blood, semen, vaginal fluid, and breast milk. And breast milk is the one I want to talk about. Breast milk it is true-ish that HIV can be contained in breast milk. Mm-hmm. It is not that transmissible. There certainly are babies that can be breastfed by HIV positive mothers. The World Health Organization is now recommending that even HIV positive mothers breastfeed their babies.
Really?
Because the risk to the baby of not breastfeeding is often greater than of getting HIV. It's complicated. If I were an HIV positive mother, I would want to have a very serious conversation with my doctor or healthcare professional or nurse about that. Is it useful for high school students? Most of them not, unless they are HIV positive, expectant parents. They can probably forego that information. And the reason it's potentially harmful is because it adds another point against breastfeeding. So what the take-home message for young people is: breastfeeding is bad, breastfeeding is dangerous. We have less and less people breastfeeding their babies, particularly in communities of color that I work with in Boston, and that is a much greater risk to the babies. So do we want to continue to tell high school students that they can transmit HIV from breast milk? I don't think it is. It may be true, but I don't think it's useful, and I think it's potentially harmful.
That's super important, just because in my maternity rotation, and I just graduated nursing school 6-7 months ago, and like the absolute vast majority of the evidence-based practice, the research that has come out recently, breastfeeding is like gold. It's just the gold that you need to you don't need to. You should most definitely.
It's healthier for the baby.
It's healthier for the baby.
So let's not discourage it in young people.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Is there a prototype country, state, place? Is Massachusetts great at sex education?
You might think so.
I do think so.
However, I hate to burst that bubble, but Massachusetts has no requirement that a school teach sex ed. And for many years, they've tried to pass the Healthy Youth Act. And the Healthy Youth Act would require that if a school system taught sex ed, no requirement that they teach it, but if they taught it, it be medically accurate and age appropriate. And they have not been able to pass this legislation for years because apparently we don't care if people teach sex ed, we don't care if it's medically accurate, and we don't care if it's age appropriate. You can talk about anything you want in a classroom. It doesn't have to be true, useful, or not harmful. You can talk about whatever you want. There is no expectation that you do sex ed, and there is no expectation that it'd be accurate, and that's in Massachusetts. So there are some states that have an expectation that the legislation that there will be sex ed, and there are some that have a legislation that it be medically accurate. Massachusetts is not one of those states.
Wow. Okay, so we're not required, and the schools that do it don't have to be honest. It doesn't have to even be factual.
No,
that's.
We can go right back to your dick with
that's actually. I'm really disappointed with Massachusetts. But all right, we'll move from there. Hopefully this gets some more information out there. Okay, so let's talk about sex.
Okay.
How much of sex would you say, when you talk into the classroom of students, how much of it is pleasure and how much of it is you have sex to have kids?
I think that most people, most of the time, have sex for pleasure. Most sex that people are having in this world is not procreative. Some is, but not all. But that is, interestingly, not really a direction that we would go in the class. There's a big push towards pleasure-focused sex ed. And I think pleasure-focused sex ed is about acknowledging that there are reasons besides procreation that people may have sex, and that there are sort of positive aspects about sexuality in people's lives. But high school students don't necessarily want to hear adults talking about sex, and they're a little bit uncomfortable with that. But the idea of adults talking about pleasure really makes high school students squirm. So I think you need to acknowledge pleasure, but it's not really something I'm probably going to be able to bring into a classroom per se without the students freaking out.
Oh my god. Okay, so can we talk about like debunking some of these, stereotypes, misconceptions? So like, what about porn though? You can talk about porn?
So porn we do need to talk about.
Yeah, because that's
even
teenage
though
heaven.
obviously it does relate to some of those topics that are going to make administration squirm. But here's the problem. In the absence of sex education, in the absence of sex ed and at home, in the absence of sex ed in the schools, where are young people getting their information? Unfortunately, a lot of young people are using porn as their source of sex education, which is kind of horrifying, as porn is not meant to be educational. It is not realistic. It is, to borrow an analogy from Carol Queen, who is a fantastic writer, to learn about how to have sex from porn would be like to learn about how to drive from car chase movies. If I use the Fast and the Furious as my driver's ed, that is pretty much the equivalent of using porn as sex ed, right? If I drive like that, I'm liable to hurt someone and get arrested.
Of course.
Same with porn. Same with porn.
Oh, I love that. I absolutely love that.
So we do need to talk about it. Yeah,
okay.
We absolutely need to talk about it.
So do you talk about it, though?
Mm-hmm.
You
Absolutely.
do talk about
We do talk about it. We talk about it as it in terms of its limitations, in terms of actually teaching anything that's useful. We talk about whether it is realistic, and sort of some of the values about sex and relationships and gender that can be part of the baggage that comes with porn.
Yeah, because porn it's out there. I mean, and there's nothing we can do about it, right? And for just being as a kid, when going through high school, being after high school, college and stuff, even if there is absolutely no screens in your household, if there's absolutely no TV, no porn, nothing at the home, it is somewhere, and they do have, they will find a way to see these things. So I think it is super, super important to talk about these things, specifically porn. Within porn, there's genres that go from there's like crazy genres where they have animals and they have, furniture. You're doing outside, you're doing it, and all of these taboo-ish things. Do you guys talk about any of that? Like the taboo, public, having sex in public, the taboo of, having sex with a family member, having sex, just the crazy stuff. Is that something you guys talk about at all?
Not in relation to porn. I think really the only way in which we talk about that is in terms of its realisticness or not realisticness in terms of actually providing any useful information, which I don't think it does, or its somewhat negative values about relationships and about gender. In terms of individual things, however, I get a lot of questions which may be born out of people's experience with what they're seeing online. So we'll certainly get questions about all of those topics. And one of the things that is a classic in sex ed is to have students give everyone an index card and have them write questions down on the index cards. And then you can read anonymous questions is a classic, and then you can read those questions, and you get questions on all kinds of things. I should get some questions. We should have a whole episode in which we answer questions.
Cool questions. That would be nice. You do most of the question answering. I'll be amazed. Okay, relationships. It's fun. It's exciting. You start a relationship, you end relationships. It's sad. How do you guys talk about sex within relationships? Do you guys push one person should have sex with just one person forever? Do you say, be free and do whatever you want with whoever you want?
Neither of those, because either of those is really about somebody's values about relationships. I think that the important things to remember, and because I get lots of questions about all kinds of wild stuff that, is this okay? And is this okay? And is that okay? And honestly, those are really your individual values and what you bring to the table. But I think that the baseline is respect. It is important to respect your partner and for them to respect you, respect for everyone in a situation, for people to respect each other. It's kind of a baseline in human interaction. I think consent is critical, so that everyone feels okay, people are not manipulated, that people really have a meaningful and informed consent for anything that they're going to do, and safety, that people are not put unnecessarily at risk or put their partner unnecessarily at risk. So that's the baseline. In terms of other things, what you think is okay or what somebody else thinks is okay, that's really on you and your values and what you believe. But without those three things, then we're not okay.
Then we're not okay. And I think it is like, it's nearly impossible to like have one class that answers everyone's questions, because everyone is super, super, super different. It's just really, really hard to answer this person's questions, who he thinks that sex should only be done once a month and for procreation, to answer another person's questions who's like, I want to have sex with everyone I see. So like that's somewhere.
And yet, if we apply those three criteria, right?
You hit all the basics.
Respect, consent, safety, then can you do these wild things? Could it be consensual? One person might say yes and one person might say no. Would it be respectful? One person might say yes and one person might say no. But that's the thing you have to grade it by, is those criteria.
That's a really good way to decide how to, educate. So prostitution, should that be legal?
Good question. Outside of youth education, but we'll go with it anyway. So here's the thing, is that criminalization of prostitution largely affects the most disenfranchised people. So what I mean by this is people who are involved in sex work, and particularly street level sex work, subsistence level sex work, are very much oppressed by, they are very much abused by the criminalization system. So criminalization of prostitution is not meant to protect the people who are engaged in prostitution. Criminalization of prostitution does harm the people who are engaged in prostitution, who are usually already in a bad situation, often disenfranchised. So I am very much against the criminalization of prostitution because of the effect that it has, primarily on women, trans women, and some men engage in prostitution, but they are the ones that are very much harmed.
But will you not go as far as saying to make it legal? You won't go that far. But you're against the criminalization of it.
I am in favor of decriminalization.
Okay.
Legal is actually a different situation. So, for instance, in Nevada, prostitution is legal, and as such, it is heavily regulated by the government, which, from what I understand, also further oppresses and disenfranchises the people with the least power in this situation. So criminalization and legalization are both designed to protect Johns, not prostitutes.
Oh, jeez. Okay.
Decriminalization is what most people who are involved in, trying to support sex workers are.
Okay, so I have to end on this. Being a young man, penis size. Is that super important?
It always has to go there, right?
It has to. I mean, we have to. It has to be that. I can't be talking to a sex educator and not talk about penis size. How much does a size of a penis matter?
I think it matters, but not necessarily how you think. So, does it matter to an individual partner? It may, in that sometimes it is possible to have a size mismatch between couples, like whereas somebody is too big for someone's comfort, right? Or they're not getting enough sensation. I mean, there's mismatches, but our culture is obsessed with penis size.
Oh, forget about it.
In this way that is actually doesn't have. So here's the thing: penis size does not dictate how much of a man you are, how masculine you are, or how good a lover you will be. And this is something I do have to talk about with high schoolers constantly.
No doubt.
Because our culture's obsessed with it, and there's jokes about it, and there's all of this about it. And so whereas it is important for what size condom you use, and how maybe sex is going to work with a particular partner, or whether it will be comfortable or uncomfortable depending on on those things, but I think our association of size and masculinity is unfortunate.
It really is unfortunate
for men.
It is, but that's for another thing. I just want to give you the floor, the stage. Is there anything that you like, you preach, or you like to just make sure everybody knows about sex? Anything that you know that you want the world to know about sex that people might have a misconception or might not know? Or do you think, we've touched most of those?
I feel like we've touched most of those. So we're going to go with happy, healthy adults. That's our sex ed mission statement.
Yes.
We're going to go with information needs to be true,
okay,
useful, and not harmful.
Awesome.
And I guess that people should feel positive about their bodies, about their lives, and about their relationships. Relationships should be something that helps support a person and not bring a person down. So I hope that people can go out and have great sexual lives, however that manifests for you.
Are there any books, videos, anything that you want me to put in the description below for the people to know that is super important about sex ed?
Wow, so many books and videos, but I will definitely direct people to Lacey Green.
Yes.
Who directs a video series called Sex Positive, who is amazing and the best, sex educator.
I will put that in the description below. Margaret, I truly appreciate this time. I feel like I am enlightened in the world of sex now. Thank you. I appreciate it. And best of luck to you.
Thank you, Q.